You are listening to the OverFunctioning Leadership Podcast, learning leadership concepts through life experience. Hello, friends, to another podcast sponsored by OverFunctioning Leadership. I am Alex.
I'm John.
I'm Zach.
I'm Allison.
Yes, we have a guest today, and it's actually a woman. We have a woman on the podcast, which is, I want to say, a first. I mean, I did interview somebody, but those no longer on the podcast.
Those chat
anymore.
Sessions are now located on YouTube.
Oh yeah, we do have a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
But so we were super.
Oh yeah.
So we're very
those
happy
zammers.
to have Allison and John. This is your guest. I mean, it's all of our guests, but more in particular, this is your guest.
Yeah, I would just say in celebration of Title IX that passed in 1972, it took us until 2018 to actually get a woman on the podcast.
Oh,
so
man.
We're a little behind the times, but Allison, welcome.
Yeah.
Well, and it's
an honor.
2018, as in we started this podcast in 2017.
Right.
So I think we're doing pretty good.
We are doing pretty
Progressive.
good. Yep, we are progressive. So Allison Capella is the guest that we have today, and Allison is someone I've known for, well, all my life, actually. Allison is my oldest sister, so we come from a family of 3 children. So there's myself, who's the youngest, Tom is the brother, middle brother, and then Allison is the older sister and only sister. So Allison is with us tonight, and looking forward to hearing her perspective from not only a person who is of faith, but also her work in the church. And tonight's topic, I'll let Alex kind of introduce that as he greets the guests at the door. But anyway, so looking forward to having Allison. Allison, glad to have you here tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you for not saying how many years you've known me.
Right. I kept that discreet.
Thank you.
It's very courteous of him.
It is.
Yes.
So with that, Allison, we do have Allison here for a specific reason, not just to sit here and look pretty for our YouTube channelers.
By the way, we have a YouTube channel.
So the question, she actually works within a church, and so we thought it'd be really good to talk to her about those things. Specifically, the question we're looking at is, how is a church similar to a nuclear family? So we're going to be diving into that here in a couple seconds, or a couple minutes rather. But before that, we do that, I actually have a question for John. John, this is episode 26, so we're calling this what episode?
We're calling this the 26th episode.
Oh, no, sir. Who wears number 26?
Oh, I apologize.
This is ridiculous.
Tom Brown.
Oh, Tom Brown.
Batted cleanup for the Chapel Blues softball team many years ago.
All right. Well, it's the Tom Brown episode
is.
with Allison Capella. Great. Sounds great. About how is the church similar to a nuclear family. But before we do that, we should probably recap what we did last time, which was about tolerance. And so this is a major, social topic that gets thrown around a lot. And so specifically, gentlemen, what did we talk about when it came to tolerance? What were some of the themes?
One of the big things we talked about is tolerance a good thing? Is it a bad thing? We hear a lot that we need to be tolerant, and that in this social climate, there's a lot of talk about news sources and who's being tolerant of who and who's being intolerant of who. No. And there's just a lot of that word tossed around and not a lot of action in terms of what does it actually look like to be tolerant.
Yeah. So...
Yeah, and I think if somebody, part of what we talk about in the leadership podcast is developing your guiding principles. And I think as one develops guiding principles, I think not only does a person become more tolerant, but they become more curious and open to the perspectives of other people. Even if they disagree on the viewpoints, I think it can allow a person to become more settled and move beyond just tolerating somebody and actually appreciating what they have to say.
Yeah. Awesome. And this is going to be a little shameless plug here for ourselves. There was actually a Brumble that we did on the 5th Tuesday of May. Which, if you are confused about what this podcast is about, when we talk about guiding principles or bone family systems theory, there's about 22 minutes in which Zach and I go very quickly through all of that. And so if you're confused, you can go ahead and go there and get more confused if you like.
What's that one cheat sheet resource called where you can like let's say I want to know what Huckleberry Finn was all about and I'm just not going to read it?
Cliff Notes?
Cliff Notes.
I thought you said schmoop.
Schmoop, yes.
Yeah.
Which is one of our
schmoop
favorites.
site.
If you want to schmoop us, that's a
Yes.
great episode to do that with.
Anywho, so I believe it is now fable time, correct, gentlemen?
It is Fable time.
So go ahead and warm up some milk with your cat. As in warm up some milk and maybe warm up your cat. It's fable time. And actually, we're going to go ahead and toss this over to Allison. Allison has a fable for us.
A fable. So I'll talk about how in my work there are times when I'm talking to someone about their gifts and how they share those gifts. And sometimes it gets confusing because when you're in a church and you're trying to talk to somebody about what they do and how they can share their gifts and how those can best be used, sometimes it's not in the way they think it is. And it can be a difficult conversation when it's in a faith environment versus a non-faith environment because you're affecting their faith life, their worship, their comfortableness with the church, and sometimes it just doesn't go as smoothly. Now, that's a very small percentage, but sometimes it does, and it makes it difficult.
So would you say that somebody could feel like if they weren't allowed, I don't know if allowed's a word, but if they weren't put in a certain position where they thought that they had this gift, that they wouldn't be feeling as connected to the church or feeling that they're worshiping as well?
I think they take it as they're not appreciated in the way they planned on being appreciated, or they felt that this was their gift and that they were good at. But in reality, looking at their environment, looking at how they perform, looking at the lives they touched, you could see that it just wasn't smooth and wasn't their thing. And I can also see where their thing is. And sometimes it's hard for them to see that as well.
So it seems like a lot of this could come from their own perception of themselves and you having to be the one to step in and say, hey, that's not an accurate way of looking at yourself. Let me try and clarify that for you. Would you say that's a lot of those talks, a lot of those conversations?
Yeah, I would. And I think it all comes down to really what their heart motivation is. If their heart motivation is to live out their life as God intends them to in their gifted way, then they can accept it. If it's not, and it's more ego-driven, then that can be difficult.
I thought of the thought Allison had about when you're so close to something, when something is so important to you that you have this role in the church or role at work, and it can be hard to be objective. The closer you are to something, the harder it is to be objective. And to speak the truth or to speak an observation to somebody who is so wedded to the outcome of something it really can have some difficult conversations, and I could see where that would be a difficult thing.
So, Allison, how do you get them there? I mean, you have these difficult conversations with people, so what do you do? Like, how does that work?
Well, you try to get them to see it from the perspective of sharing what they're intended to share. You pray about it. You start the meeting with that. Sometimes it goes all right, and sometimes it doesn't. Having examples of the other people's lives that they're affecting, because they can see somewhere there might be negative repercussions, and there's a pattern to it. So trying to point that kind of thing out. Most of the time, I'll be honest, most of the time it comes out well. And then, we can have a conversation about where their gifts can better be directed. But sometimes it doesn't. And then I have that feeling of I've affected their faith life, even though I wouldn't have changed having that conversation. There is that added dimension.
It's interesting that you say affecting their faith life. So let's take the secular world work where, Mary, instead of working on marketing, we're going to put you in the mailroom because we think you're better there. Okay, she liked marketing, got to go to the mailroom, doesn't like it, whatever. But the element of faith, and one might say, this is where I believe I should serve. I feel called to this particular role in the church, and to be one that maybe challenges that. I could see where that would just adds a layer of difficulty.
Yeah, if you're confronting some sort of passion rather than purpose, if you're approaching it with a purpose in mind, you're saying, hey, this is what we're trying to do, this is the ultimate goal we're trying to affect, then I imagine that conversation is easier than saying, I imagine myself as this player in that, and this is the role I'm going to do. I thought it was interesting that you mentioned prayer, because I've done a little bit of studying on that recently with a group of mine, and one of the central facets of Christian prayer is to take your mindset and your goals and all of that and sort of to align it with God's purpose. That is to say, you don't ask for a Lamborghini because you want to ask for a Lamborghini. Because when you look at what God's plan and purpose for you might be, you're probably not going to say, he wants me to have a Lamborghini. And so in that same way, when you do that, when you approach a conversation with prayer, you're almost framing it and saying, we're united in this purpose and seeking after a common goal. Let's find out the best way to do that.
Mm-hmm. So when you have somebody who you've talked through, and let's say it goes well, do you still feel some repercussions after that of somebody feeling maybe disconnected? Or
No, not really. Because going well means that they understand that their gifts are better used in other places. And I have examples I can give to them. You note this, you note that, and go through that. And as you said, John, about the secular world, a lot of it is the terms are different. You're talking about giftedness and servant leadership and passion and purpose. And those are terms that you don't really use a lot in the secular world. So it changes the nuances and the conversation to something that's more in the heart than it is a vocation of just your secular world life. Do you know what I mean? There's just a difference in the vocabulary that I think makes that conversation a little bit different for people.
Because it could be more of this could be something definitely that somebody has been part of their identity for a long, long time. Not saying that somebody who works, I'm a teacher, not saying that my identity isn't tied to that in some way, right? And somebody who's been a teacher for, we have a guy who's, retiring actually for the second time from our high school. And I can tell it's like hard for him to try to retire for the second time because he's been so identified as a teacher and he loved it so much. I imagine that's pretty similar, but almost maybe in some ways, I want to say deeper, but it could be on a deeper level based off of, when you were born, this is the way things have been, especially from a faith base with certain people. Like I've always been with this faith for this long. And so when I've always felt like I've had this gift, so I could see that playing out quite differently. John, you look very pensive.
Well, I'm just thinking about the role that you were saying about somebody who has a faith for a long period of time and taking that to its natural conclusion, because the topic of the podcast is how is a church like a family and how is it not? But in a family, you have a son or you have a daughter, and that label never goes away. And whereas somebody who is in marketing or they're, a role at work, that's a role that's fluid. It kind of comes and goes. And it seems to me that a church is closer to a family than it is to a secular world of work.
Okay, so I guess my question is, that's the overall question here. So how is a church or house of worship? Because, it could be what religion you want to call. How are they similar to a church family then? Allison, maybe you can answer that.
I think the members of the church together can, I've seen it and witnessed it, and we all have, where they come together to support one another in times of tragedy, get pulled together to celebrate things, pull together to mourn things, pull together to pull off a project and pull off something that they want to get together and do. In a family, your biological family, I think sometimes you can be a little more unkind. When you're with your church family, you have a different, you're trying to help each other. But when you're with your family, not that you don't want to help each other, but you have patterns that come out that you don't have with those people that are in your church. So those patterns and those triggers and those things happen. Not that you're as... So I think that there's the difference in between, the church family and then your biological nuclear family in that way.
One thing I was thinking about as the primary difference between non-family families, so in this case, like a church family, and your
nuclear
family of origin, nuclear family, is who's included in that and who's excluded. It's a lot bigger of a deal when you're excluding someone from your family or including someone new into it. It's a much bigger decision, and it feels permanent. And in a similar but completely scaled down way, a religious family, a church family, is looking at this and saying, we want to bring more people in, but we don't want to exclude people. And I can see how that could make these conversations easier in a sense, because the direct comparison I'm thinking of is we're comparing this to a workplace. If I don't do my job well, they're going to exclude me. Like, they're kicking me to the curb. But if I'm not doing well in a church and I understand what their intent and purpose is, then it's not that they're trying to exclude me. They're not trying to remove me from that community, but they're going to try and replace me to where I can set my best efforts.
Mm-hmm. This hasn't happened to me, luckily, but getting excommunicated from your family, where people disown someone. I know someone who was disinherited, has to be a tremendously difficult thing. I mean, if somebody is, I know many houses of worship have membership, and a person can be excluded from membership or removed from membership for conduct and so on and so forth. That has to be really difficult. But to in a family system where people stop speaking to one another, you're dead to me, if you will, has to be tremendously difficult to deal with. More so than, so I think to be excommunicated in a church would be really, really difficult to deal with. I think a family would be even more so. Firing would be terrible.
Oh, yeah.
Church would be worse, and then family would be just very, very difficult.
Now, John, as far as when it comes to an anxiety level and what you know about nuclear families, why is that so difficult? Like, where does, I mean, how does that hurt a person?
Yeah. An observation that Bowen had was that the family emotions, the investment in family, and the meaning of family is something that's almost biologically wired into us. And so we are ultra conscious of where we stand with family members, even maybe from a survival standpoint. And so, in my work with leaders, a very common question and challenge that a leader will bring to me is typically a workplace relationship where I can't get so-and-so to do something. It oftentimes then will turn into a spousal thing where it's, my wife or my husband does this or that, and it drives me crazy. So that's getting closer to the issue. But Bowen theory suggests you take it one step further to the actual family of origin and find the most difficult relationship in that family of origin and work on being a little different in that particular relationship. It pays off then in the current family that a person lives in, and then all their other relationships they have, whether it be church or the work environment. So that's the thinking of that particular idea of why family anxiety is there's just more there than there might be even in a workplace setting.
So the ultimate cutoff, let's say you're excommunicating somebody, it's not going to be an alleviation of that chronic anxiety that's just been sitting there.
Yeah, most people think this. Most people think that in a setting where, even in a church setting or another setting where people have a conflict, they'll just stop people distance from one another. And that ultimately leads to anxiety rising in both. So both parties distance to alleviate the anxiety temporarily, and it does provide that temporary relief, but ultimately both parties become more anxious.
So then I have a question for our guest over here. When you have these conversations, has it ever happened that you have been on the receiving end of that you have been viewed as a representative of an organization and their views on that? So have you ever been treated as an embodiment of the church almost and dealt with their negative or positive views of that?
Of the conversation that we've had about their gifts and that they don't take that well?
Yeah, specifically in that sort of conversation.
Sure. So I've had that experience happen where it's been so negative that I've never seen them again. Not in church, I've not seen them again. Yeah.
And so at that point and this is just a good principle to think about, whether it's a church setting or not, when we have a conversation with someone and it goes south, and they flee, they go away, what role do we have to pursue them versus, and we talk about boundaries of whose problem is this?
Yeah.
What is that? And I don't know in your role, Allison, whether do you pursue them and are you okay? And have I offended you? Or is it something where you've communicated your best thinking and now they have to deal with that on their own? I'm sure it's not an easy one-size-fits-all decision.
Yeah, I think in that instance that I was speaking of, I did not pursue them. I let them work through it themselves, hoping that they would come back and have a conversation with me. But that did not happen. And partly because of their reaction. I knew that if I pursued them, they needed time. I knew if I pursued them, it still wouldn't have been a good conversation.
When emotion's high, when anxiety's high, emotion's high, thinking is low, and it's difficult to have a reasonable conversation for any of us when emotions are high. So sometimes time and distance allows that to lay the groundwork for perhaps a better conversation.
Have there been times, Allison, that it doesn't matter which portion of the job that you have, where you've had to go out and pursue people for different things? And how does that look like? What does that look like?
Yeah, I've gone out and talked to people. It was funny, in realizing myself that initially I thought, I could do all kinds of different things in the church and share my gifts in all different kinds of ways, and then coming to the realization that that's not true. I'm not gifted in some areas, in a lot of areas, and other people are, so they're able to share their gifts, and then together we can do what needs to be done. So having those conversations, I can remember having them with people, and initially it's, they're confused and they don't understand, but just getting them to understand that. And the biggest thing is giving them my example, of how I used to think I could do X, Y, and Z, and then I realized that didn't turn out that way, and that somebody else was better at that, and that God intended that person to do it and not myself.
Mm-hmm. And then how do you when it comes to these gifts, like I guess maybe I just need some examples of what these gifts are, and then how do you figure out what people have, and
Yeah, right. Okay. So I've done a lot of studying and learning about that kind of thing. And as you talked about being an accountant, or you were talking about the teacher who was retiring, I really think of it as not a profession as it is more of the characteristics. So, for example, do you like to do things with groups of people, or do you like to do things individually? Are you the kind of person that likes to sit with a spreadsheet and be organized and have everything expected, or do you like things to be off the cuff and spontaneous? Do you like to do a lot of reading? Are you a visual person? There's a lot of information and research and testing and so forth that you can do to figure all that kind of thing out. But it's just about stewardship and your talents and what you've been given and how those strengths can be used in whatever profession you seem to be pointing towards. Could be different professions that have the same characteristics that use those same talents.
I'm just thinking about the notion of, Zach, your question that you asked Allison earlier dealt with being a representative of the church, and do people see Allison as that? And I was thinking about a related question I had from someone who. So let's talk about one-down relationships. So you have the head of an organization. It could be a family, it could be a company, it could be a church that believes in a certain mission. And then you have people that work under them or live under them. This could be child to a parent. This could be employee to the leader of the church. This could be employee to employee. We've talked about one-down relationships before. How do you navigate those maybe specifically, Allison, in a church setting where you believe in something pretty strongly and others that are in charge see it differently, but you really think you're right. You really believe you're right. And how does one manage themselves in the midst of that difficult conundrum? That's today's 10-cent word.
Conundrum. That's a big question right there. I think in my work environment, people in the work environment in the office pretty much believe in the same mission, but there are different facets that people, conservative or not conservative, buy into a little more or feel more passionate about. Does it get in the way of the overall mission? No. Do we have conversations that are difficult because we try to get people to see our way? Yes. But I think we all work very well together, and we all have that mission in mind, and we can collaborate past those difficult conversations. But we are different people, and we're brought up differently. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Helpful.
So you did mention servant leadership, which I have, run into this word from time to time. And so maybe you could give us a little definition. When you talk about servant leadership, what does that mean?
That means, especially in our work environment, it's part of our mission. It's part of what the top the boss or whatever you want to say uses. And what it means is that everyone is humble enough to do whatever needs to be done to get what needs to be done. So nothing is beneath us. We all work together. We are with all the volunteers doing whatever we need to do, encouraging them. It's doing the worst job first. And just making people understand what servant leadership is, because we're really servants helping to lead other people to be servants as well in whatever manner that is.
Gotcha. Okay. And so then how, as far as development goes, of let's say we have somebody new to the church and you're using servant leadership, is it this example, or do you guys do different trainings, or is it, what does that look like within the church to raise a different leader, like a servant leader?
Well, it's not cookie cutter, but I can tell you that for my experience, it's been getting people involved in events that are fun, to see that the people in the church and in the organization are just like everybody else. We have a good time, we all get together, and so getting them involved in an event that's fun, like the fish fry or the festival. I've seen a lot of people dip their toe in and think, I don't know if I want to volunteer at the church. That's, such a bunch of do-gooders or whatever they think. I don't know. And then they have a great time and they see that we're all a bunch of fun people. And maybe I'll do this or maybe I'll do that. And then you start recognizing it. It's training the leaders in the church, the ministry leaders, to how do you cultivate those people and how do you get them to recognize their gifts and to take on a more important role and to bring their kids in. And, all that stuff kind of starts happening.
So what characteristics would you say help that sort of environment to flourish? You've mentioned fun. We talk a lot about how you have to have this lighthearted spirit for there to be this good leadership to thrive in a non-anxious system. So when you look in your experience and you say, these are times where maybe it really hasn't thrived, or these are times where people are just flourishing, what sort of characteristics do you see?
The thing that I think gels people together the most when you're in that environment is something that happens that creates a need for compassion. So when people see people are compassionate towards each other, there's a need, there's kids are ill or they don't feel something's going on, that compassion that takes it away from the fun, we're having a great time level, to these people really care about me, these people really want to help me, these people are becoming more a part of a family to me.
So would that include maybe listening? Like they feel like they've been heard, would you say?
They feel like they've been heard, or they also feel people step up and do things for them without being asked.
Gotcha. Now, would you say, and I've heard this a lot, especially about churches, that like community groups are like really where a lot of this servant leadership can happen and things can go really well. Is that true? Would you say that's true?
I would agree. Small faith sharing groups that people get together. Yes, absolutely. Because that's where you really get to know people and people really share openly without fear of getting spread around, what their deepest thoughts are about their faith or their doubts. Yep, for sure.
So you would say that's the opportunity for people to share their true selves and also to be curious about one another in a safe environment.
Yes.
For the listeners that have heard our podcast before, several occasions we referred to David Rock's work, Neuroscience Leadership. If you're interested in leadership and how the brain operates with leadership, David Rock has a lot of good stuff. But one of his famous pieces is the SCARF model, and for those that are new, or even reminders of every human being craves 5 things, and Allison, you hit on 2 of them. So the SCARF model is an acronym. Alex, I know how much you like acronyms.
My favorite.
Your favorite acronym. What is that? What would Alex be for an acronym?
I don't even. No, it would be nothing.
Awesome.
No.
Likable. Excitable.
Xylophonic.
Blah, blah, blah.
Xylophonic.
Nobody cares.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the S part of that, can I continue with SCARF
Yes,
model?
you can, because
Okay.
I like Dr. Rock. Okay.
All right. Is the status piece where you mentioned about servant leadership, that no one is above a certain job and you do the hardest job first, and people are considered to be, the leader, and the followers, if you will, are in it together. So the status piece is hit upon, and then the relatedness piece, where people have a common mission and they saw that people are fun. And so those are 2 of the 5 elements of the SCARF model, which again is an acronym. And it allows for people just to be calmer and be more open. And so I can see why people resonate with that.
So, Allison, do you have any questions for us?
Well, since I've never done one of these before, this has been interesting for sure. So, in your church or worship environment, give me some examples of where you've seen family and been connected.
You talk about community groups. I see a lot, especially whether it's, we're specifically talking about maybe of a Christian church, but I've noticed a lot of times when people go somewhere and do something, that usually on mission, that seems to be a place where a lot of people grow too, because there's that piece where you said there's some compassion, or different things can happen when you're just with people and you can't get away from them. In some ways, you see the ugliness of people. And when I mean ugliness, I mean because they didn't take a shower and stuff. But you also have just this rawness sometimes, because people, like you said, when they go to a house of worship, usually are going to put on some nice clothes, and they're going to look a little bit different from they usually do. But when you're spending so much time with people, then it gets to a point to where they can't really cover that up anymore.
And that's interesting, because typically that kind of thing is you don't know those people very well when you start that together. And whereas when you get into something at church, you kind of get to know people. It's a slower process. But in a mission trip environment, like you said, you don't know those people as well as you would, obviously, your nuclear family or a church family.
And another side to it on these trips is, we talk a lot in Bowen's theory, when you're trying to read the emotional current, when you're trying to see all these underlying processes that are happening, these reactions, these responses, when you remove yourself from those systems, your family of origin specifically, it's interesting to see which roles you can fall into. And it also makes you more sensitive when you return to those currents.
Interesting.
That is for sure true. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I've never thought that through, because when you come home, I don't know, because sometimes on mission trip you can take a different role. In a lot of ways, when you come home, it's like you're almost, in some ways, I've noticed this, that I've grieved my old role going away. On this trip, I was, Alex the Builder or something. That might not be the correct,
That would be ATB.
Construction worker.
Alex the Builder, the first iteration of Bob the Builder.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. So, anyways, and then coming home and almost grieving the loss of that role.
And it's interesting to think about. I'm just spitballing here. I see a lot of people a little younger than me, just coming out of college or at the tail end of college, typically in a a frustrated patch. Either they've been overworked or they don't really know where they're going. They're asking hard questions. One of the outs that they look for is they want to leave. They want this separation. But the thing that's interesting about these trips is you automatically have this this community around you that is seeking to be inclusive, which is often what people are looking for. But you don't see that when people are just saying, I'm going to up and leave. I feel as if people are trying to leave behind those roles and those communities that they've been a part of that they haven't found fulfillment in, and they're trying to change. But when they go to these places, they end up in similar roles. So it's interesting to think, when Alex, you specifically, Alex the Builder, when you go into these situations, do you think that if you were to continue in them, would you eventually find your way back to your original roles?
Oh, most definitely, yeah. Bowen Family Systems would say that that's true. So we've talked about this in other podcasts, that soon your friends become the roles of your nuclear family. So, my father is the quiet and steady one. So somebody of my friends will be that person. And then, my mother is one of my good friends, and she, she tends to, be really close with me, and that takes more of a fusion role, which I'm fine with. And so we hang out a lot, and I would find somebody who's like that, and then my sister was so compassionate and loving, and I'd find somebody like that. And so everybody, John basically just raised his hand to pretty much everything. Anyways, so that's what Bowen would suggest, that's one of those, that's definitely something that would happen. So he would theorize that. So,
which is interesting, because what that suggests is that while you're on this trip, you're in this ability of consciously responding rather than passively reacting. So you're being a person who you're actively trying to be in an attempt to redefine behaviors and emotional reactions and responses because of this specific purpose that you're trying to fulfill.
You're kind of temporarily responding in place.
Yeah.
Or trip.
Which is one of the reasons that we say when you're checking out differentiation, you want to pull people. You want to pull them out of the water a couple times.
Sure.
Unbelievable trip. But I've also been on trips that there's usually one person who is not going to do that.
Not going to do what?
Not being able to respond. They are very reactive and not wanting to do much of anything. Mm-hmm. So I think we've all encountered that in a lot of ways with different groups. So which is also interesting. There's already an immediate backlash towards wanting to do anything. So I don't know if we want to dissect that, but that's just another observation I was thinking of.
Yeah, to hit on that real quick, I went to South Africa one year, which was actually an awesome trip, and because of the work we did. But the person who did not respond well responded negatively before anything happened. It was, if you were to ask her what went wrong on that trip, she would have told you culture shock. But if anyone else were to tell you when this started, it started in the airport, and it climaxed on the airplane, and it just rode it all the way home.
Yeah, and if we go back, it started before the trip. It started before she got to, the prepping of the trip. It started back with the family. So somehow this got carried on from the nuclear family all the way to this trip.
Oh, I thought you were going to say it goes back to our episode on nature versus nurture, where we determined it all comes down to nature.
Did you say nature?
Yeah.
DNA. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I did win that.
Yeah, you did win that conversation.
So I think it might be a good time here to recap our overall question and make sure that we answered that to the best of our abilities here. So how is a church, place of worship, what have you, similar to a nuclear family? So that's the overall question. Is it similar? And then how is it similar, if so? Allison?
Let's start with Allison.
Yeah, she's the expert,
our
right?
number one guest right now.
Yeah,
number one guest. The first female guest, is that right?
The first lady of
You're
our podcast.
our best female guest.
Title IX.
Yeah, Title IX. The best one they've ever had. How's it the same? That's your question?
Well, I don't know. Is a church similar to a nuclear family? Would you say
I think it's
that's true?
similar. I do. I don't think it's exactly the same, but I do think it's very similar in that people make the connections that are important to them. They do gravitate to people who are similar into their families. I agree with that. I think they're different as in it's easier to disconnect from them if you feel like you want to do that than it is from your nuclear family, obviously. But I think a lot of people, especially when they get older and they're more alone, really, really feel that the church is their family and have a lot of people there.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. I just thought of church. I hesitate to use the word should, but maybe church should be a complement but not a substitute for a family. It should complement the family but not be a substitute for it.
That's good. Any final thoughts there, Zach? If it's an acronym, I'm going to smack you.
No acronym. Sorry.
Good.
That's not what I was thinking about. My final thought would probably be I see a lot specifically in the churches I've been a part of. There's an emphasis on family first, which I think is interesting. You want to be a good father before you're trying to be a good leader of whatever part of the group you're being a part of. You want to make sure that you know where your first and foremost responsibilities lie and then seek those further outlets in the church. But the flip side of that is, let's say you're not doing that. The churches I've been a part of, I want to emphasize this is my experience, have been very good at offering resources and aids to say, hey, this is what we think the family should look like. These are the problems that we see. Let's connect you with someone within this congregation that we think does it well, and let's set that straight. So I really do see that church seeking to complement the family.
Yeah, so I think we covered, what you guys had to say here as well. I would say that the only thing that I could add to this is that within your nuclear family, you really don't have a choice. They are just there. And then within the church family or worship family, you can actually take a chance on people. And so I would, I guess in your nuclear family, you could take a different chance. You could do different things differently, which is what you're supposed to do with
foster care, yeah.
Bone family systems, right? But it's a little bit easier to take chances on people because there's not that initial I'm going to have to see them all the time and I have to live with them. So different, but that whole faith piece really sets things on different. So anyways, any other final thoughts from the panel? No? John just...
Yeah, no, I'm just... are we going to do shout-outs, or is that...
Oh, yeah, well, we can shout out. You'd like to shout out...
I'm going to shout out my daughter, Juliana Moyer, who's... Oh. This is our first audience member. We actually have an audience of one tonight's podcast. So
I would say that that's untrue.
Misha
has been.
Jesse, is that who you're thinking?
No, Jesse wasn't, and still no. Still not our first. It was actually Priscilla. Thank you very much. So
the OG. You get, for those who are in attendance and looking through the camera, if you look in the way back over there, you'll see Priscilla dressed for the nice hot weather in her sun hat.
She's my best dog, mostly because she doesn't eat, sleep, drink, or move.
Or scratch me.
So anyway, shout out. Obviously, shout out to Allison. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate that. You can find us. Oh, shout out, I guess, Jesse Huffstetler, who made this awesome music, correct?
Yeah, the diggity tunes that are at the beginning and the end.
Yeah, and you can find us. Where can you find us?
You can find us on Facebook at fb.me/OF Leadership. That's the short link, or you could just type in OverFunctioning Leadership in the little search bar at the top.
So many slashes.
There's the YouTube.
iTunes, Google Play.
Yeah.
Simplecast.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty much it. That's where you can find us. The only other place is that we would love to have your input. Anything, any questions you have, you want to maybe rail on us, I don't care. Actually, that's what Zach would prefer, if you could just be angry towards us.
I don't know if we ever gave a official shout-out to the Joe Kane, one of my college buddies, but when Alex and I reviewed a movie and he did not appreciate Alex's opinions of that movie, he responded in, if we had printed it, probably a 2-page single-spaced response, citing links, sources, etc., specific timestamps of the movie, of how Alex was wrong in his very subjective interpretation of the movie.
Hey, I posted that roast on Facebook. Thank you very much.
If you want to see Alex get roasted on Facebook, scroll down, hit the like button.
Or if you want to see me roasted, just come to school. Anyway.
Pow.
But with that, email us at theofpodcast@gmail.com. That's theofpodcast@gmail.com. That was such a long closing. I think I'm done. My name's Alex.
I'm John.
I'm Zach.
I'm Allison.
And we'll catch you next time.